Welcome to the Institute for Management Studies Leadership Conversations podcast, where we have leading thought leaders discussing their research and identifying ways that you can incorporate it to take your learning and development to the next level. In this podcast, I have Dr. Clint Longenecker, an award-winning educator and one of America's leaders in creating high-performance leaders and organizations, and recently retired as a distinguished university professor and the director of the Center for Leadership and Organizational Excellence at the University of Toledo. His teaching and research and consulting interests are in high-performance leadership, as well as creating great organizations. He has been the recipient of over 60 outstanding teaching, service, and research awards and numerous industry awards. In addition, he has also been recently recognized by the Economist as one of the top 15 business professors in the world. He holds a PhD in management from the Pennsylvania State University. Thank you, Clint, for joining me today.
Sir Charles, it's good to be here, and it's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to you as a thought leader in the leadership genre as well. So thanks for the invite.
Great, thank you. Clint and I have known each other for many years, and I'd love for him to share with the audience how he went from college football player to leading edge leadership thinker. So could you provide a little more background of your fascinating story?
Well, thank you, Charles. I was a exceptionally average college football player, and it was really kind of fun because I had a great mentor by the name of Jack Simonetti, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Clint, you'll never play professional football. You got to get more serious about your schoolwork." And I had always worked pretty hard in the classroom, Charles, but it just didn't click. And that was kind of the thing until my senior year of college, and it started to click. And I was very fortunate. I was mentored by some great people that said, "Why don't you go on and get an MBA?" And I had grown up in a family business, so I had quite a bit of business experience already. So when I finished my MBA, I rolled into some consulting I did for a couple of years. And then some other mentors said, "You need to go get a PhD." I did some part-time teaching. I really liked it. And so I consider myself a practitioner, a practicing academic, and especially in the area of business. So I spent 38 years at the University of Toledo teaching, researching, consulting all around the issue of leadership and personal high performance. And so I think my sporting background gave me a little bit of a rubric, if you would, to use in that application. But I just tossed this idea out for everybody that I stand before you as a person of average intelligence, but I have great emotional intelligence, and I'm very motivated and I'm very driven. And my focus in life is to bring out the best in the people around me. And so that has been really something that's been very, very helpful. And the other part, and this is maybe most important, I'm married very, very well. So my lovely wife, Cindy, is probably the secret sauce in all of this, in addition to my faith. So that's the quick and dirty story.
Thank you, Clint. And love your research around best practices of great leaders, because many organizations now, they no longer want supervisors or managers or administrators. They want leaders. And given what research tells us about the importance and the power of leadership, it's easy to see why. There's a wide body of research that makes it clear that leadership has a direct impact on critically important performance variables that affect the organization's trajectory. Mm-hmm. And for the last 2 decades, you've conducted an ongoing research project to identify what these best practices are of these high-performance business leaders. Can you tell us a little bit more about that study?
Absolutely. It's called the Getting Results Project, and we sponsored it through the University of Michigan. It started out with a sample size of about 2,000 high performers, and the original book came out the same year. It's called Getting Results, 5 Absolutes for High Performance. It came out the same year as Good to Great. And we cross-sold on Amazon for the better part of 5 years. The books were side by side. And we like to think that we had a little bit to do with Jim Collins' great success, if you would, in the mix. But all that to say, when I was interviewed by a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, and when the book first came out, and her question was, "Well, what did you learn that was really earth-shattering in this study?" And I said, "Well, we learned about this very powerful group of high-performance leaders. We studied people at all levels of their organizations, and we didn't target just senior-level people. We put middle management people who are very successful, very effective, frontline supervisors as well." And I said, we found that these fundamental leaders at all levels practice the fundamentals of leadership better than the rest of us. And the comment was, "Well, what do they do that's earth-shattering, really different?" And I said, They practiced those fundamentals really, really well. And so she kind of didn't like my answer. But truth be told, if you work for these people, it's really awesome because they're practicing the fundamentals. So great leaders take care of the people around them. And one of my most favorite things about leadership is if you equip somebody to be a great leader, and in my humble opinion, all effective leadership is servant leadership. I am in my leadership position to serve the people around me. Some of the best CEOs that I work with, they don't make it about themselves. They make it about the success of the people around them. And they create a culture of practicing fundamentals. So here's some questions for everybody out there who's in a leadership position. Do the people that work for you have a clear and unambiguous picture of their role, their goal, and their responsibilities? Do the people that work with you have a voice in the organization? So if they've got a great idea, can they come forward with that idea? And there's somebody who's willing to listen. Or if they've got a problem, is there somebody there who will listen to help them solve that problem? If they've got an idea for a breakthrough product or how to save money, do they have a place that they can go to have somebody listen to what they have to say? And we could go on, but it's about great communication, the process of teamwork, being emotionally intelligent, and being a person of your word. And so here's the question that I ask so many leaders day in and day out, is this. Hey, what is your process to be the best leader that you can be? What is your process? Have you taken the time to articulate what you stand for as a leader and what systematic process that you want to use? And one of the things I greatly appreciate about IMS is that you're about giving people process tools so that they can improve their individual leadership performance, which in turn impacts their organizations in real and powerful ways. And I can say this for research experience, practitioner experience, and the like, if you don't have a process in place, things can become pretty random. And randomness is the arch enemy of excellence. So that probably bears worth repeating. Randomness is the arch enemy of excellence. So if you want to take your leadership game up a notch, the question is, what is your process for leading, influencing, and empowering the people that you work with? And that's something that we've really developed a lot of expertise around over the last 2 decades.
That's great, Clint. And you're right. IMS really tries to focus on that process and on the implementation and application of these leadership insights. Mm-hmm. Now let's turn it to the opposite end of the spectrum. You also have conducted a study that talks about when leaders fail to deliver, right? And you define that as the inability of the leader to deliver the desired results that their organization needs in a timely, appropriate, and sustainable fashion. Yeah. So in these times of rapid change, do you think this exposes leadership deficiencies even quicker?
It absolutely, positively does. And actually, this afternoon, I spent some time doing some analyses on a series of CEO interviews that we did with Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 CEOs about how they handled the pandemic. And one of the key findings, and this is really important, is that these CEOs said, we learned very quickly, 2-3 months into the pandemic, who could lead and who could not lead at all levels of the enterprise. So I would submit to you that crises of all shapes and sizes become basically a crucible for people. And some people thrive in that kind of environment. Some people catch up and learn quickly and figure out what to do to make a difference. And there's other folks that basically implode or fold in on themselves. And so that was a big part of these CEO discussions. They learned very, very quickly who in their senior leadership team could lead in a crisis and those who could not. And so the good got better and the bad in some cases were uninvited to the party, which is kind of nobody likes to see anybody lose their position. But I will say this, I've yet to meet somebody who did a post-mortem reflection when they lost their job that they didn't see some of these things coming had they been paying attention. At the end of the day, you made a really good point. And I wanted to add this on to my previous comment. We have interviewed, since the original book came out in 2001, so 2 decades ago, an additional 2,500 high performance leaders. And these are people identified by their companies as being great at what they do for at least 5 years. This is not a self-nomination process or a beauty contest. This is like, who do you really think is making a difference? And what's remarkable, when you look at these leaders, They step up and they practice the fundamentals, and they do so faithfully and regularly. And in doing so, they prevent the meltdown, they prevent failure. And if you look at the top 3 reasons that have emerged from our leadership studies on failure, number 1, the person has the inability to communicate effectively with the people around them. So they can't communicate very well. Number 2, they have an inability to connect with folks. So they're not very emotionally intelligent, Charles, and they expect other people to adapt to them rather than they adapting to others. And they're frequently not very empathetic for the people around them. And then the last one is they fail to create clear direction and clear focus for the people that are in their charge. Now, I could add some more in there about the inability to coach and develop people and not building a team and being unethical or unprincipled. But the big factors that drive leadership failure fall into that category again of fundamentals. Fundamentals will hurt you every time. And as a football player, it's about blocking and tackling. You know, as a former football player, blocking and tackling, get right. It's amazing how many good things can happen in that game.
There you go. Well, let's pick one of those. Let's pick the number 1 cause, the poor communication talents and practices.
Yep.
And what is a practical tip that you could give those listening to improve in this area? If this is truly the most important factor driving leadership failure, is the inability to communicate effectively in a 360-degree fashion, right?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So as long as organizations have been doing surveys, and I'd be willing to bet that a lot of our listeners out there today have organizations surveys every year. And typically, if your organization is like most, you could be a very well-run organization, but here's what pops up, that communication typically surfaces as the number 1 or number 2 Achilles heel, if you would, to the organization. And so, and I get phone calls quite regularly or conversations quite regularly around this issue of what can we do to improve communication in our organization because our scores are low. And I always go back and I make this comment. There's really only 3 kinds of communication in every organization. So in direct response to your question, Sir Charles, put this in context. Here's the 3. Here's the 3 factors that really drive communication. Now, question number 1. Do the people that work for you have a clear and unambiguous picture of what their job entails? And do they have the information they need to perform their job? So communication issue numero 1 is, do we have a very effective process in place to make sure that we have roles, goals, and responsibilities clearly articulated and that the person has the information they need to perform their job? Now, number 2, this comes back to the next important point. Does the person have access to information about what's going on around them in the organization? Hey, what's our grand strategy? Where are we headed? Have we taken on any new customers? How's our cost structure shaping up right now? Hey, what's the cost of our goods sold? All this information about what we do and how we do it is encompassed in this. Does a person know what's going on around them? And is the information really good? Is the company really good about sharing information with their workforce systematically with a process so that everybody in the organization doesn't have to spend time roaming the halls saying, where are we going? What's going on? I hear there's an acquisition. We need to really take some of that off the table by making sure that we effectively communicate with people in this regard. All right, number 3, and I alluded to it earlier, does everybody in your organization have a voice? A voice. That means if I have an idea for a better product, a way to fix things, to make things better, or there's a problem out there that's not really working out so well, or I have a suggestion to make about how we can take our company to a better place. If nobody listens to me, we have real communication problems. So from that perspective, every leader can address the communication issues that will surface in a survey by communicating job-related stuff, organizational-related stuff, and giving people an appropriate and effective voice in their future with what's going on in the organization. And that was a long-winded answer. I hope that addressed your question.
It did. I love those practical insights that they can implement, hopefully tomorrow, for those that are listening. The other one that I wanted to focus on is a lack of personal integrity, character, and trustworthiness. Because in periods of change, the credibility of a leader is critical, and people aren't going to trust, right, a leader that they don't perceive as having strong character and integrity. But at the same time, right, it's critical for the leader to demonstrate competency for the job they hold. So when character and competency interact, they determine, right, the extent to which a leader is trustworthy to their people. Can you expand
Mhm.
upon this concept? Because I love this interaction between the two and the model that you set up.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and thank you, Charles. I think the issue of trustworthiness is really important. And if you ask folks that are listening in today, or let me ask this question to folks who are part of this podcast today, have you ever worked for a boss that you didn't trust? And if you ask folks that question, most folks are going to say, "Well, yeah." And I'll say, "So how did that impact you?" "Well, oh man, I didn't know how to take what they said. I filtered the information. I didn't know what I could share with them, and especially if everything was about them." So the trust factor in our research has surfaced as being the single most important factor for who we're going to follow. And if we trust somebody, we'll follow them closely and diligently, and there's a good chance we might even be the old school word loyal. If we really trust somebody and we know that they have our interests in mind. And the question is, who are we willing to follow? People that we trust, number one. Number two, people that we know will help us get our goals, achieve our dreams, our aspirations. So if a leader is in a position of influence, she or he can have a powerful impact on their people, and they can become more trustworthy every time they take care of their folks, and they use the golden rule, and they take ethical decision making to the next level. In fact, it's sort of funny. I pulled this off my shelf about 15 minutes before we started talking. So this is a workbook for the military, and I do a lot of training for the military units out there, and as well as the intelligence community around the issue of ethics. And so it all comes down to, Charles, as you mentioned, trustworthiness. And so I'd pose a question to people again. Organizations are really quick to tell people what not to do, but they're not so quick to show people how not to do them, if that makes sense. So I don't know about you, but raising my teenage kids, like I would say, don't do this, I have spoken. So somehow it was from on high, and it worked occasionally, but not so much on an overall basis. But I did find, if I would take the time to explain to my kids the why behind the what, and I'd listen to their rebuttals, if you would, and we talk about bigger picture, longer term issues. If we took the time to do those things to create some context for my proclamation of don't do this and don't do that, what we found was that the kids would buy into it much more readily. So I'm of a very different bent where leadership, training, and ethics are concerned. We, in our leadership development programming, where ethics are concerned, we don't just say, don't do this and don't do that, but we equip people with a rubric, number one, for effective decision making. So ethical decision making is right there. They're cousins. So I'd ask folks that are listening today, hey, how many of you have developed a personal set of behavioral guidelines for your decision making at work to make sure that your decision making is first excellent, secondly ethical, first ethical, secondly excellent, okay, or whatever you want to do. I think finding out what that looks like for you is really important, and we have a vehicle to help people figure that out, what that rubric looks like. Number two, then, once we have that in place, I go back and say, now, what are the temptations associated with the position that you hold? And most people look at me and they go well, and I'll go, well, this isn't to cast dispersions on anybody, but we're all part of the human condition. And so we all face temptations in life, and temptations are things that are basically that we know to be wrong, that could hurt or damage us if we fall prey to them. And so our goal through our leadership development program is to help people identify the temptations associated with the position they hold, number one, and the culture that they're operating in, number two. And then to build a series of guardrails. So it's all about temptation mapping. We identify them like they're landmines. And when you do work with the military, they will go through with mine detectors on the roads and in the fields. And when they find a mine, they mark it. They'll put a staff in the ground, a yellow tape on it, and they'll keep moving. So people coming behind them know what's out there that could kill them potentially, at a minimum maim them. And I would go back and say, once you know where the temptations lie in your job, it's building out guardrails that'll keep you out of trouble. So I would submit to you this very simple fact that it is so much easier to avoid temptation than to resist temptation. And so it's a very thin line in there, but I'm of the school that there's a whole bunch of things that leaders can do to keep themselves out of trouble. And I was on a board call yesterday, and I got the last comment in the meeting was, we have just terminated a newly hired division leader in our organization for breaking some very specific company guidelines. He's been in the job for about 5 months now, and that they did a 36-hour investigation and his position was eliminated just like that. And what's amazing to me, the faces of the folks on the Zoom meeting were like, oh my goodness, how is this even possible? And I would go back, it's possible. People say, well, this person was bad to begin with. I would say maybe, or because, but most of us take a pretty good, thorough process in place about hiring people. So maybe the person got to that position, and in this case, he couldn't handle his success. And so I'm of the school that success can be a primary reader of a person's ability to be exposed to temptation. Number one, the higher you rise, and our research shows the higher an organization, the greater opportunity there is to be exposed to temptation, number one. And number two, the higher you rise in any organization, you know what happens? You control the agenda, you control more resources. You don't always have accountability for your daily activities. You don't always have people who are your best friends to help you keep your feet firmly planted on the ground, because hubris or ego can creep in. And these are real issues that people do not talk about proactively, and especially in leadership development programming. So I would go back and ask everybody, hey, do you know what the temptations are that you face right now because of the situation that you're in with your life and the rank you hold in your organization, number one? And number two, what does your set of guardrails look like to keep you from being washed overboard or driving your car off a cliff, if you would? That can, and I know this to be so true, that this person who made these serious decisions and was removed from this position yesterday, or I'm sorry, on Monday, I would go back and I would just say this, that his life as he knows it is ruined. His family is in a terrible place right now because of that. And his reputation that he spent a lifetime building is now dust. It is now crumpled. It is now broken. Now, can he resurrect himself? Absolutely. Redemption? Absolutely. But the question would be, if he would have been looking into a crystal ball and done some programming beforehand to figure this out, would he have engaged in this particular set of activities? And I would submit to you, no, absolutely no, because the cost is too great. And we have an exercise we run people through. Hey, given the temptations that you face in your job, which one are you most vulnerable to at this moment in time? This is a homework assignment. Okay, and if you were to fall prey to that temptation at work, maybe it's embezzlement, maybe it's walking off with spare change or company cash, maybe it's an affair, misuse of your credit account, whatever that might look like, I would go back and say, there's an exercise out there that says this. I want you to write out how you're going to explain this to your family and your kids and your spouse when you are terminated for this reason, and write out your response. How are you going to explain that you got caught up in this? And that proactive process can really have a powerful effect to get people to think and remember before they get involved with things that could hurt them and damage their company and their careers and their livelihoods. Again, sorry, long-winded answer, occupational. If working with a professor all these years, it's an occupational, it's right there with some of the being exposed to toxic things in factories and stuff. So sorry.
No, I love the insights that you shared. I just want to profile one of those top 10 temptations, because you actually ranked them by frequency. And the number one you had was falsifying, massaging, or manipulating information or data. Participants, from what you identified, found that many senior leaders face this real temptation to be less than candid or honest, or even manipulative when presenting information and data attached to their positions. So can you provide the ethical guardrail that will hopefully help leaders from avoiding this temptation?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. So if it's financial data and that sort of thing, or if you work in an organization of any size, there's always accounting folks there who can cross-check. I always tell people, if you're handling, and it was sort of funny, years ago met a captain on a Navy ship, and they have literally, when they take a aircraft carrier to sea, there's millions of dollars on that thing for payroll and other sorts of things. And they'll always talk about the fact they have petty cash control, and that they have tight mechanisms in place. And at the end of the day, identifying, what the mechanisms are to control that from being exposed to individuals usually involves a couple people. So again, if somebody is bent on cheating or lying or manipulating data, there's always a way to beat it. But I always encourage people to cross-check data or get a second set of eyes on a data point along the way. And again, in many cases, people do this to make themselves look better or to protect themselves or their people. And especially, if there's a crisis going on like right now. But I would go back and say, you have to think longer term. You have to think longer term, because people can justify almost anything. But at the end of the day, if we get caught up in manipulating little things and cheating on little things, our research shows, as does the research of others, it tends to morph into bigger issues as our character, if you would, slowly gets chipped away at. And forgive me for ending a sentence in a preposition.
No worries. So concluding our discussion today, I wanted to do more of a call to action based on what we discussed today. What is appropriate at both the individual level and maybe the organizational level that leaders should start today in regards to best practices, things to avoid, and really kind of that walk the ethical talk and conduct that temptation mapping that you had suggested? What would be your top 3 things that they should start today?
Okay, I would go back and I'd start with this simple thing. What is your purpose in life? Mark Twain is credited with saying, but others also, the 2 most important days in any person's life are the day they were born and the day they figure out why. So I've been fortunate to have figured out early that I was a people developer. And so if you look at my business card, it has people and organizational transformer, because that's what I really enjoy doing, transforming, taking people from here to here to here, and organizations as well. So and IMS is the exact same way. So if I had to offer some things, I'd say, number 1, what's the mission for the position that you hold, and what is your life mission? Identifying your mission is really, really important. I would say number 2, taking time on a daily basis to sit and think and reflect. So Thoreau himself said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that's a pretty bold statement, if you would. But we know because of technology, we're always on stage. I would encourage people to disconnect for a period of time each day. So my 3 action items would be, number 1, make sure your purpose is clearly stated for the position you hold, and that you're taking the steps daily, activity-wise, to support that. Number 2, take time every day to stop, think about how you're going to optimize the day, because each and every day is a treasure, whether we realize it or not. Even if we're still in the midst of a challenge or 2 at our organization, we got to go back and cash that in. It's an opportunity to make a difference, which is the best part about being a leader. The fact that you can change lives, change trajectories of people is a big, big deal. And I would go back to that very, very last point at the end of the day, that it's really important to basically make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and reflecting, because you win with people. We've got to put time, effort, and energy in people, and that's quickly lost in the heat of battle. And if there's anything really exciting coming out of the pandemic, from my perspective, is that CEOs and leaders at every organization are saying this, people really are our most important resource. And for a lot of leaders, that's an epiphany. So you win with people, everybody. And hey, thanks for the time. Thanks for allowing me to step into your day, and for the treasure of your time today. So God bless you good. And Sir Charles, thank you for the invitation today. I hope I gave you a couple things to think about. And remember, my last comment today would be this: when you're in the office, don't run with scissors, if I may say so.
Thank you, Clint. It was a pleasure to have you with me today. As always, I learned a great deal, and I think we provided listeners with many actionable insights in bite-sized chunks that they can implement and will be valuable to them today. I also want to thank all of you for listening. And remember, it's not about what you know, it's what you do consistently that's going to make the difference. Have a great day, everyone.